The cold April of 2023 was the hottest month for Europe and China relations in decades. For Europe's supranational elite, China is now the enemy. Now the leadership of the European Union will have to convince the countries of the community of this fact, and not all Europeans are eager for this confrontation. China has been a problem for the European Union before, but much less than for the United States. America sees the People's Republic of China as a dangerous contender for the position of global hegemon. The European Union has always seen China as simply a strong competitor that cannot be eliminated, which means that it must simply strive to limit and beat it as much as possible. The main thing here is that Brussels has long been confident that Beijing can be forced to play by Western rules. This included convincing it that friendship with Russia was not the right solution, getting Beijing to help strangle Russia in the current conflict, and then, by the combined forces of the West and partners, to point China to its unassuming place. Ideally, all this should have been realized without much confrontation, because the Chinese, they say, would have realized that the whole world is against them. The fight is not in their interests. This view was very widespread in Brussels until very recently. In the past month, however, a rapid sequence of events has reversed this view. European leaders began to prepare intensively for a confrontation with Beijing, moving completely into the fairway of United States policy on the Chinese track too. Europe's irritation with China has been growing for 20 years, as it became clear that the post-colonial model of outpacing Western development was no longer working. There are many objective factors. The trade balance is more than twice in favor of China. The active investment of the People's Republic of China in the European economy, especially in science-intensive areas that the West traditionally considers its own, leaving only dirty and heavy manufacturing to the East. The rapid penetration of Chinese capital in other countries, especially in Africa, which Europe also considers its own. Also, the unpleasant dependence on China for rare earth resources serves as a perpetual reminder to Brussels of the failure of its new green utopia without China's economic assistance. At the same time, there are weighty constraints on European investment in China, resisting European attempts to use its soft power in China through the media or social networks. The European Union is also familiar with harsh responses to pressure on Europe's favorite human rights tracks, whether in Xinjiang or Hong Kong. Europe's irritation has already manifested itself in practice. Targeted sanctions against Chinese officials for the same human rights violations, joining the United States crackdown on Huawei, or banning the social network TikTok for European functionaries. But it has not yet come to trade wars or carpet bombing sanctions. For obvious reasons, it is impossible to block more than 700 billion euros of trade turnover without the risk of leaving Europe not only without household appliances and clothing, but also without solar panels, batteries, and generators for wind turbines. The main and strongest irritant for both Brussels and Washington was the course of unrestricted partnership between China and Russia, which intensified after the start of the special military operation and the imposition of Western sanctions. For the past year, Europe held on, realizing that China was preparing for the 20th Congress of its Communist Party and for the state power issue of extending Xi Jinping's term of office. However, once this process was completed in October at the Congress, he was re-elected as Secretary General of the Communist Party of China, and in March, for a third term as President of the People's Republic of China. Brussels apparently considered the electoral cycle over and attempted a diplomatic offensive. Preparations for a diplomatic counteroffensive against Beijing were made on March 30. On that day, exactly 1 week before her trip to Beijing, the head of the European Commission delivered a speech on relations with China that was clearly worked on by quite a few European specialists. In her speech, she formulated several key theses on how the Europe would talk to China. Von der Leyen accused China of intending to promote its own new world order that will compete with the current global system. In this context, she contemptuously called her visit to Russia a show of friendship in Moscow. Brussels also believes that China has turned the page of reform and openness and moved into a new era of security and control. Beijing's imperative to increase control and security will break the logic of free markets and open trade. Thus, apparently, the European Union meant that Beijing was ending its game of playing by the rules of the West and beginning to form its own norms and priorities. In addition, according to the European Commission president, Beijing seeks to become less dependent on the world around around it and to make the world more dependent on China. This is especially important in terms of the supply of lithium and cobalt, critical for clean technology or the development of quantum computers. Von der Leyen stressed a major European pain point. In response to all this, the European Union intends to actively counter China. Her speech clearly implied that Europe should continue cooperation with China where it is profitable, while changing the balance of power in its favor and undermining Beijing's position in key areas. In general, it turns out that the head of the European Commission decided to play aggressive negotiations, to unleash a waterfall of claims and demands on Beijing, and then to say something like the following in a meeting with Xi Jinping. We are willing to postpone indefinitely the rebalancing of our relations if China reaffirms its commitment to rule-based peace, publicly withdraws from cooperation with Russia, recognizes the sanctions against that country, and returns to the community of civilized nations. In Beijing, von der Leyen's speech at the Mercator Institute was clearly listened to carefully, analyzed, and drew its own conclusions. Von der Leyen was able to meet with the President of the People's Republic of China at a trilateral meeting in the presence of Macron. We do not know what happened behind closed doors, but we have every reason to believe that she was still not able to give a good account of the proposal she had prepared for Beijing. In general, the result of the visit was clear. China is ready to work with European countries on mutually beneficial projects, but does not consider the European Union a serious partner, noting the dependence of its policy on the United States. It is not going to play by exclusively Western rules either, and it is not even going to conceal it. It should also be noted that this path does not guarantee China's success at all. European countries are not free to choose their own foreign policy, let alone trade rules, which are determined, albeit on the basis of compromise, but with the help of Brussels. Will Beijing be able to maintain a constructive partnership with the leading EU countries given the aggressively hostile position of Brussels and most Eastern European countries, which transmit the United States' position? The question is debatable. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel and write your opinion in the comments.